It was a regular evening in a small-town diner where people came more for comfort than for fancy food. The place was always warm and welcoming, filled with laughter, the smell of coffee and the sound of an old piano playing in the corner. The piano was like the heart of the diner, bringing joy to tired workers, families, and travelers passing by. But tonight something felt different. The piano sat quietly in the corner, its wooden surface reflecting the dim lights, waiting for someone to touch its keys again. Among the staff working that evening was a young waitress. She was polite, calm, and always on her feet, serving customers with a gentle smile. She didn't talk much, but everyone liked her. She knew every regular customer by their favorite order. The old couple who came every Thursday for pie and tea, the group of truck drivers who joked loudly at the counter, the college students who always asked for extra fries. She served them all with quiet kindness. She had a peaceful way about her, but there was something hidden behind her eyes. Sometimes when she passed by the piano, she would glance at it for a second too long, as if remembering something. No one ever noticed it, though. To everyone else, she was just another waitress trying to make ends meet. That night, the owner of the diner announced that the piano player who usually came every Friday couldn't make it. People groaned in disappointment. The live music was something everyone looked forward to at the end of the week. "Looks like it'll be a quiet night," the owner said with a shrug. Then someone jokingly said, "Hey, maybe one of the waitresses can play something." Everyone laughed, including the staff. But then, to everyone's surprise, the quiet waitress spoke softly. "I can play a little, if that's okay." The laughter grew louder, not in a cruel way, but in disbelief. "You? You can play the piano?" One of the regulars chuckled. "Didn't take you for a musician?" She smiled shyly, her hands nervously holding the tray. "Just a little," she said again. The owner laughed and waved toward the piano. "Well, go ahead then. Let's see what you've got." The customers clapped playfully, some teasing, others curious. No one expected anything special. After all, she was just the quiet girl who brought them coffee refills and cleaned tables. With slow, hesitant steps, she walked toward the piano. The sound of her shoes against the floor echoed faintly in the diner. Her heart beat fast, her hands trembling slightly. She hadn't touched a piano in years. As she sat down on the old wooden stool, she could feel everyone's eyes on her. She placed her fingers on the keys and pressed a few notes. The sound came out uneven, a little awkward. Some people giggled, whispering to each other. A few clapped jokingly, as if encouraging a child. She felt her face grow warm with embarrassment, but she didn't move away. She closed her eyes for a second. In that moment, she remembered her father's voice, a woman soft but strong, and saying, "Play from your heart, not from your hands." She could almost see him beside her, sitting on their old couch, smiling as she practiced on the small piano they once had at home. Music had always been their bond. After he passed away, she had stopped playing completely. Life had forced her to grow up fast, bills, work, responsibilities, leaving no room for dreams. She took a deep breath, placed her hands again on the keys and started to play, not for the people watching, but for herself. The first few notes were gentle and slow, like someone telling a story they hadn't told in years. Then something changed. Her fingers began to move faster, lighter, freer. The melody filled the diner like a wave of emotion. It wasn't a simple tune. It was full of feeling, depth, and beauty. The sound was so pure it made the air still. The laughter stopped. Forks paused mid-air. People who had been chatting quietly leaned forward, eyes wide. The same group that had teased her moments ago now sat frozen, listening. The music grew stronger, each note carrying something real: sadness, love, and a touch of hope. It was like she was telling her whole life story without saying a word. Her fingers danced across the keys as if they had been waiting years for this moment. Even the cook peeked from the kitchen door, wiping his hands on his apron, completely mesmerized. The diner's lights seemed softer. The air felt heavier with emotion. No one could explain it, but everyone could feel it. It wasn't just music. It was her soul speaking out loud. When the last note finally faded, there was complete silence. The sound seemed to linger in the air as if even the piano didn't want to let it go. She slowly lifted her hands off the keys and looked down, unsure what to expect. Then suddenly the room erupted in applause. It wasn't polite clapping, it was heartfelt. People stood up cheering, clapping, whistling. Some even had tears in their eyes. The same customers who had laughed earlier were now on their feet. unable to believe what they had just heard. She looked around, overwhelmed. The owner came forward speechless for a moment. "Where on earth did you learn to play like that?" he asked. She smiled shyly. "My father taught me," she said softly. "He loved music. I used to play with him when I was a kid." Someone from the back called out, "You should play every weekend," and everyone clapped again in agreement. She laughed nervously, shaking her head. "I don't know about that," she said, but her heart was full in a way it hadn't been for years. That night something changed. The piano that had been silent was alive again, and so was she. People kept talking about it long after she went back to her shift. Even when she refilled their cups or brought dessert, they looked at her differently now. Not just as a waitress, but as someone special. Later, after closing time, she sat alone at one of the tables, the lights dimmed, the diner empty. She looked at the piano in the corner, the one that had brought her back to something she thought she had lost forever. She smiled quietly to herself and whispered, "Thank you, Dad." The next morning, word had already spread around town. People came in asking, "Is it true the waitress played like a professional last night?" The owner grinned proudly. "You'll have to come Friday night and find out for yourself," he said. That one night had changed everything. The laughter that had once filled the diner before she played was now replaced by admiration and respect. She had reminded everyone that sometimes the quietest person in the room has the loudest voice, not through words, but through what's hidden deep inside their heart. Every person who was there that evening would remember that moment for a long time. The way a simple waitress, with trembling hands and a brave heart, turned silence into music and laughter into tears. And even though she went back to her normal life, something inside her had awakened again, the part that had been waiting for the right moment to shine. And in that small-town diner, whenever someone passed by the piano, they didn't see it as just an instrument anymore. They saw it as a reminder of the night a quiet girl showed everyone what real passion sounds like. That was the night when everyone laughed as the waitress touched the piano, until she played like a legend. The next few days after that magical night felt different in the small diner. Something in the air had changed. The quiet waitress who once moved around unnoticed now carried a different kind of glow. People who used to just nod at her or smile politely now greeted her warmly, asking, "So when will you play again?" She would blush and smile, not sure what to say. She never expected her simple act of playing the piano would touch so many hearts. By the end of that week, the diner was busier than usual. Word had spread around town about what happened that Friday night, how the shy waitress had played the piano like a true artist. Some came out of curiosity, others because they didn't believe the story was real. Even people who had never been to that diner before started showing up. The owner noticed the crowd and walked over to her. "Looks like you've started something special," he said with a grin. "How about you play again tonight?" She hesitated for a moment, wiping her hands on her apron. "I don't know," she said softly. "I wasn't planning to do it again. I just wanted to help that night." But when she looked around at the customers, their smiling faces, their excited whispers, she felt something stir inside her again. It wasn't about showing off or being praised. It was about sharing the music she had locked away for so long. After a few seconds of silence, she nodded. "Okay," she said. "Just for tonight." When evening came, the diner filled up quickly. Families, friends, and even a few reporters from the local paper sat waiting. Some people had their phones ready, wanting to record the moment. The lights in the diner were slightly dimmed, and the air was filled with a quiet excitement. She sat at the piano again. This time she wasn't as nervous as before. Her hands were steady, her heart calm. She took a deep breath and began to play. The sound was even more beautiful than last time. The melody was soft at first, like a warm breeze, then slowly grew powerful and deep. People listened quietly, their eyes fixed on her hands as they moved gracefully across the keys. Each note told a story of struggle, loss, and hope. Some customers wiped their eyes, some smiled. Even children sat quietly watching as if they knew something magical was happening. For a moment, the diner didn't feel like a small-town cafe anymore. It felt like a concert hall where emotions had found their voice. When she finished, the same thing happened as before. Silence, then applause that shook the walls. People stood, cheering, clapping, and shouting her name. She smiled, her eyes shining with tears. The owner came forward and said proudly, "From now on, Friday nights belong to our very own piano legend." The crowd loved it, clapping even louder. From that night on, every Friday became special. People would come early just to get a seat near the piano. Some brought flowers, others brought small gifts like chocolate or notes of appreciation. The diner that once only served coffee and meals now served something far more meaningful: inspiration. The waitress's life started to change slowly. She still worked the same shifts, cleaned tables, and served food, but there was something new in her days: purpose. She wasn't just a waitress anymore. She was someone who gave people a reason to feel again. One afternoon, an older woman came to the diner, walking carefully with a cane. She waited until the waitress finished her shift and said softly, "I heard you play last week. My husband passed away a few years ago, and I haven't smiled much since then. But your music, it reminded me of him." "Thank you, dear." The waitress's eyes filled with tears. She didn't know what to say. She just held the woman's hand and smiled. That moment stayed with her for a long time. She realized her music wasn't just sound, it was healing people, even in small ways. As the weeks went by, she began to practice again during quiet hours. After closing time, when the diner was empty and the lights were low, she would sit alone at the piano. The sound would fill the silent room, echoing softly against the walls. Sometimes she'd play slow, emotional tunes. Other times, she'd play lively melodies that made her smile. It became her way to breathe again. One night, while she was practicing, a man walked in quietly. He introduced himself as a music teacher from the nearby city. He had heard about her from a friend and wanted to see if the stories were true. He listened as she played and nodded with amazement. "You have a natural gift," he said. "You play with emotion, not just technique. Have you ever thought about performing outside of this diner?" She smiled gently. "I don't know. I stopped playing for a long time. Life got busy. I just do it for peace now." The man nodded understandingly. "Sometimes peace is what makes the best music," he said before handing her his card. "If you ever change your mind, call me. People deserve to hear what you can do." After he left, she sat there thinking for a long time. She didn't dream of fame or fortune. But part of her wondered if maybe her father had been right. That music was her path, not just her past. The next Friday, the diner was completely full again. The regulars cheered as soon as she walked in. The owner joked, "You're our star now. I might need to start charging tickets." Everyone laughed and she smiled shyly. As she started to play that night, she looked around the room and noticed something different. People weren't just listening to her music, they were connecting with it. Couples held hands, strangers smiled at each other, and kids leaned on their parents' shoulders. Her music was bringing people together in a way words never could. Halfway through her performance, she saw something that made her pause for a moment. A small boy, around 10 years old, was sitting near the counter with his mother. His eyes were wide with wonder as he watched her hands move across the keys. When she finished playing, the boy walked up to her shyly and said, "I want to learn to play like you one day." She smiled and knelt down beside him. "You can," she said warmly. "All you need is love for the music. If you feel it here," she pointed to his heart, "your hands will know what to do." The boy nodded seriously and his mother thanked her before leaving. That small moment meant more to her than all the applause she had ever received. As time went on, the diner became known far beyond the little town. Travelers would stop by just to hear the waitress who played like a legend. Her story spread through local newspapers and social media, but through it all she stayed humble. She never saw herself as a star, just someone sharing what she loved. Even on her busiest days, she still worked her shifts, helping customers and cleaning tables. The piano in the corner was now polished and decorated with small flowers people brought for her. It had become a symbol of hope, proof that hidden talents could shine again no matter how much time had passed. Sometimes, after her performances, she would sit alone and think about her father. She missed him deeply but also felt grateful. It was as if every note she played carried a part of him. In a way, he was still there, not in person, but in every melody that came from her heart. One rainy evening, after everyone had gone, she sat quietly at the piano, the lights reflecting softly off the windows. The rain tapped gently on the glass as she began to play a soft tune she had written herself. It was a song about memory, love, and courage, a song she called "The Night I Found My Voice." The diner owner, who had stayed late to count the cash register, stopped and listened from behind the counter. He didn't say a word. He just smiled, realizing how much she had changed not only the diner but everyone around her. Her story was no longer just about a waitress who played the piano. It was about rediscovering dreams, about second chances, and about how one small act of courage can touch hundreds of lives. And as her soft melody filled the empty diner that night, it reminded everyone who had ever heard her play that no dream is ever truly lost. It's only waiting for the right moment to be heard again. That was the, magic of the girl who once was laughed at for touching the piano, until she played like a legend. The weeks turned into months, and what once started as a simple night at the diner had now become something much bigger. Every Friday evening, the small place filled up long before the music began. Some people came straight from work, others drove from nearby towns just to listen. The sound of the piano had become a part of the diner's heartbeat. It wasn't just about food anymore. It was about feeling something real. The waitress still wore her same uniform, still greeted every customer with a smile, and still worked long hours, but deep inside, she was a little different. The girl who used to hide her talent now stood proudly in front of people, not because she wanted attention, but because she wanted to share what made her happy. The same hands that once carried trays now carried emotions, and everyone could feel it. One Friday night, while she was finishing her shift before her performance, a man came into the diner with a small camera bag hanging from his shoulder. He looked around, smiling. "I heard there's a miracle pianist here," he said jokingly. The owner laughed and nodded toward her. "You're looking at her." The man introduced himself as a journalist from a city newspaper. He wanted to write a story about her, about how a quiet waitress had turned an ordinary diner into something special. At first, she didn't know what to say. She wasn't used to being in the spotlight, but the journalist spoke kindly, saying, "Your story can inspire people who've forgotten their dreams. It's not just about music, it's about courage." That touched her heart. So she agreed. That night when she played, the journalist recorded a short clip for his story. He didn't interrupt or talk. He just listened. When the video was published online a few days later, it spread faster than anyone expected. People from faraway places commented about how her music made them emotional, even through a screen. Some said they were inspired to start painting again, to sing, or to pick up their old instruments. The diner became even busier after that. Cars lined up outside and people waited patiently just to find a seat. The owner, who had run the diner for 20 years, said he had never seen anything like it. "You've brought this place to life," he told her one evening as he watched her wipe down the tables. She smiled softly and replied, "No, it was already alive. The people just needed something to remind them." One day, a young man entered the diner carrying a small bunch of flowers. He looked nervous as he approached her. "I just wanted to thank you," he said. "My sister used to play the piano, but she stopped after losing confidence. After watching your video, she started playing again. You reminded her that music isn't about being perfect and it's about feeling." She listened quietly, touched by his words. "Tell her to never stop," she said with a warm smile. "The world needs more people who play from the heart." That night, when she sat down at the piano, she decided to play something new, a piece she had written herself. It was gentle and full of emotion, like a letter to everyone who had ever felt forgotten. The room was silent except for the sound of her fingers touching the keys. The melody told a story of pain, of love, and of hope reborn. Some people cried quietly. Others closed their eyes, letting the music speak to them. When she finished, the applause was soft but deep, the kind that came from people whose hearts had been moved. After the crowd left, she stayed behind a little longer, running her fingers gently over the piano keys. She whispered to herself, "Thank you, Dad, you were right. Music never really leaves us." One weekend, she received a letter in the mail. It was from a small local music school. They had seen her story and wanted her to visit and speak to their students. She hesitated at first, unsure if she had the right words, but something inside her told her to go. The following week, she walked into the classroom, greeted by a group of children sitting eagerly with their instruments. Some had guitars, others violins, and a few sat by small keyboards. They looked at her with admiration and curiosity. The teacher introduced her warmly, saying, "This is someone who reminded the world what real music feels like." She smiled and began talking softly, telling them how she once stopped playing because life became too heavy. She told them that it's okay to take breaks, but it's never okay to give up on what you love. Then she sat at their piano and played a simple tune. The children listened quietly, eyes wide, completely still. Afterward, one little girl raised her hand and said, "I get nervous when I play in front of people. What should I do?" She smiled kindly and replied, "Close your eyes and play for yourself first. When you do that, the world will listen naturally." The girl nodded seriously as if she had just been told a secret. That visit became one of her favorite memories. On her way back to the diner, she couldn't stop smiling. It wasn't fame that made her happy. It was connection. Her music wasn't just sound. It was a bridge between hearts. Back at the diner, the owner greeted her with good news. Guess what? The mayor called earlier. "They want you to perform at the town festival next month." She froze for a moment, unsure what to say. "Me at the festival?" she asked in disbelief. "I've never played outside this diner before." The owner laughed. "Well, it's time the world outside these walls hears you too." The next few weeks were a whirlwind. People encouraged her, saying they'd all come to see her play. The diner customers even made a handmade banner that said, "Our star from the diner." Every time she saw it, she blushed, but deep inside, she felt proud. The day of the festival finally came. The park was filled with people, families, children, and even strangers who had heard her story online. The stage looked big, much bigger than anything she had stood on before. As she walked up to the piano set in the middle of the stage, her heart raced. She could hear the crowd murmuring softly, waiting. For a brief second, she felt that same nervousness she had felt months ago in the diner, that same fear of being laughed at. But then she remembered that night, the first night she had dared to play again. She remembered the faces of the people who had listened, the laughter that turned to silence and the applause that followed. She smiled to herself and whispered, "Just play from your heart." As soon as her fingers touched the keys, all her fear disappeared. The sound flowed beautifully, echoing through the open air. The crowd fell silent, completely drawn into the music. It wasn't just notes. It was her life story unfolding through every sound. When she finished, the applause was louder than anything she had ever heard. People stood up, cheering, clapping, some even wiping away tears. She stood from the piano and bowed slightly, her eyes glistening with emotion. She couldn't believe it. The same girl who was once too shy to even speak loudly was now standing on a stage, celebrated by hundreds of people. After the performance, many came to thank her. The mayor shook her hand and said, "You reminded this town what true art looks like, not fame, not show, but heart." Those words stayed with her. That evening, back at the diner, she sat quietly with a cup of coffee, the lights dim and peaceful. The owner came over and said softly, "You did something amazing today. You've made us all proud." She smiled and said, "It still feels like a dream." He nodded. "Maybe, but sometimes dreams come true when you're not chasing them." She looked around the diner, the place that had given her the courage to start again. The piano in the corner gleamed under the soft lights, waiting for her touch. She got up, walked over, and played a gentle tune, not for an audience, not for applause, but for herself. The sound filled the empty diner, just like it had that first night. Her journey wasn't about becoming famous. It was about finding herself again. She had reminded everyone, including herself, that even ordinary lives can hold extraordinary moments. As she finished the song, she closed her eyes and whispered, "Thank you, life, for giving me a second chance." And from that day on, every time someone asked how her story began, she smiled and said, "It started the night everyone laughed when I touched the piano, until I played like a legend,